What about a woman who just wanted a few quiet nights alone in the bush?
I used to love going off-grid. Nothing cleared my head like parking the car somewhere no one else could find. Walking until the noise dropped out and setting up camp where the trees swallowed the sky. That part of the bush, near an old disused trail, was mine. No one ever seemed to know about it. But I wasn't careless. I packed everything properly, let someone know the general area I'd be in, and carried a PLB in case something went wrong. And nothing ever had. I was 26, had a job. I didn't like it, and a flatmate that I liked even less. I needed the space. I left early that Friday, drove for 5 hours, turned off onto a dirt road that had eaten 2 sets of tyres before I learned where to swerve, and hiked the last 40 minutes to the site I always used. Flat ground, good trees for a hammock, and to Tiny Creek, 10 minutes east for water. It was already late afternoon when I set up. The light was getting long and gold. There were birds overhead, cicadas further off, and that thick scent of gum leaves and hot dust. I built a small fire ring, boiled water, and set up the tent and my gear. Routine. Familiar. But still, something felt off. It wasn't anything specific, just something. Maybe it was the tyre marks I saw just before I turned off. Fresh, thick tread that turned off the dirt road and vanished into the bush. Probably a four-wheeler, I told myself. Pig hunters, maybe. But I didn't like that I hadn't seen them pass me. I shook it off. I always got a bit jumpy the first night. By the time I was zipped up in my tent, it felt normal again. I read for a while by torchlight, then turned it off and listened to the breeze roll through the trees. At some point in the night, I woke up. No noise, no dreams, just alert. Eyes wide open. Tent fabric glowing soft grey blue in the moonlight. I held my breath, heard nothing, just wind, and fell back asleep. I woke up late the next morning. The tent was warm already, and the bush outside was still and quiet in that heavy way that makes you feel like you've missed something. It was probably just the heat, but there was a weight in the air I couldn't shake. I crawled out, stretched my back, and went about making a coffee the way I always do. But even then, little things weren't sitting right. The fire pit looked disturbed. Nothing major, just the kindling slightly out of place, like it had been picked up and set back down by someone who didn't care how it was arranged. I told myself maybe a wallaby wandered through, or I'd knocked it during the night and hadn't noticed. I didn't fully believe it though. After coffee, I walked down to the creek to fill my bottles and rinse my face. The water was cold and clear, and for a moment the weird feeling started to fade. It was one of those mornings where everything feels ordinary but slightly off. Like you've walked into a version of your own life that's been copied, and something about it didn't transfer properly. When I got back to the tent, I spotted something just beside the flap. A single boot print in the dust. It wasn't mine. It was larger, wider, and the tread pattern was wrong. I crouched down, checked my own boots, then checked the print again. It wasn't a fresh print, but it hadn't been there yesterday. I would have noticed. That much I was sure of. I stood up and started walking the perimeter of the camp slowly. I wasn't panicked yet, just rattled. That sort of deep in your stomach warning that gets louder the longer you ignore it. Nothing else looked touched, but I noticed myself glancing into the trees more often, listening between bird calls, feeling like I was trying to hear something that wasn't making any sound. That's when I opened my pack. The main zip was half open, which I never leave undone. That pack's second nature to me. I know every clip, every pocket. I unzipped it fully and checked inside. Everything was there. Food, phone, knife, wallet. Except one thing. My license. The wallet was still zipped. Cards all still there. But my license, the one card that had my name, address, and photo, was gone. I stood there holding the wallet for a moment. The bush around me was completely still, like even the air had stopped moving. Whoever had done it, they'd come up to my tent, unzipped my bag, opened my wallet, taken one card, and zipped it all back up again. Not an animal, not a mistake. That was deliberate. I packed up in silence. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were going in circles. I didn't bother folding things properly or putting anything back its usual place. I just wanted to leave. I considered heading back the same way I'd come, but I didn't like the idea of retracing my steps. Not if someone had followed me in. There was a fire access track that ran along the other ridge. I would add maybe 40 minutes to the walk, but it was more open. You could see further in all directions. It seemed to take ages to finally get ready, but it was probably no more than 9 minutes. I had decided that the fire access track was the way to go. That felt safer, so I set off. It's funny how seemingly basic decisions can have life-altering consequences. I didn't see anyone, but I kept catching movement in the corners of my vision. Shadows that disappeared when I turned, or the crunch of leaves that didn't repeat. The kind of thing you tell yourself is your own paranoia, until you start noticing how often it happens. It was maybe an hour into the hike when I saw it. A shack, just off the trail behind a wedge of granite and some scrub. I only noticed it because the way the sun hit the edge of the tin roof. It looked abandoned, rusted, weather-worn, half swallowed by trees. But something about it made me stop. I stood there for a long time before I stepped off the trail. I didn't want to go closer, but I had to know if someone was living in there. If this was where the footprint led. If this was who had my license. The shack wasn't locked. Just a loop of rope hooked around a bent nail. Inside, it was dim and still. Dust hung in the beams of sunlight. The smell was thick, earthy, something faintly metallic. There wasn't any furniture, just a wall. And on that wall, rows of clear plastic sleeves, each pinned up with small nails. Driver's licenses. Maybe 30 of them. Men, women, different states, all faded to varying degrees. Some looked like they'd been there for years. Others were newer. I walked along the wall slowly, reading each name, checking each face. My decision to take the access track led me here, and if it hadn't, I wouldn't have seen it. Tacked in the centre, perfectly clean, perfectly recent, like it had just been placed there. It was mine. I don't remember how long I stood there staring at the wall. I was barely breathing. It wasn't just seeing my license. It was the timing. I'd only decided to take the access track at the last minute. A choice I'd made casually, instinctively. The kind you don't think twice about until it spits you out somewhere you were never meant to be. That license hadn't been there long. Wasn't faded. The corners were still stiff. And it hadn't even gathered dust. Someone had been in this shack recently. Of course, it had to be recent. Last night I went to bed and I had a license. This morning I didn't. Maybe even less than an hour ago. Maybe while I'd been walking toward it. I looked around, slowly, carefully, and suddenly the silence felt deeper than it had before. Not peaceful, but purposeful. Like something was waiting. I thought about grabbing my license and leaving. Just taking it, stuffing it in my bag, getting back to the trail and never mentioning it to anyone. But I didn't. Something in me said not to touch it. I don't know if it was fear or instinct or some warped form of reasoning, but I couldn't shake the idea that if I disturbed anything, he'd know. Maybe he was watching. Maybe this whole thing was staged. The way the licenses were displayed. The way mine was centered. Like it was left there for me to find. Almost like a message. So I backed out of the shack slowly. Closed the rope loop. Didn't run. Just walked. I tried to think clearly, but everything was happening behind a wall of static in my head. My thoughts weren't stringing together properly. I couldn't figure out where I was on the trail anymore. My legs moved on autopilot, while my brain tried to make sense of the fact that someone had come that close, touched my things, carried part of me out of this place, and pinned it up like a trophy. The bush felt different now. The light harsher. The quiet more deliberate. Every bird call made me flinch. Every gust of wind felt like footsteps. About 10 minutes later, I saw movement ahead. Just a figure, still. Barely visible through the trees if you weren't looking. It was far enough that I couldn't make out features. Just the outline of a man standing between two stringy barks. Not moving, not shifting weight, not adjusting his gear. Just watching. I didn't stop. I didn't run either. I didn't want him to know I'd seen him. I kept walking. Steady, but too fast to feel casual. Trying to keep my face forward. Trying not to betray the fact that my heart was hammering in my throat. My mouth was dry. My pack suddenly felt too heavy. I rounded a bend in the trail and kept going another 50 metres before I slipped off to the side and crouched behind a rock, waiting. I held my breath, listened. Nothing. He didn't follow. Or if he did, he was better at this than I was. I stayed hidden for as long as I could stand it. My thighs cramped, my feet tingled, and every second I expected to hear a twig snap nearby. But it never came. When I finally stood again, I stayed low, moved carefully. I stopped checking the map. I stopped trying to orient myself. I just wanted out. I followed the trail, always checking behind me, always listening. Somewhere along the way, maybe 20 minutes later, I saw something beside the path. A small stack of stones, 5 of them, flat and pale, stacked deliberately just off the trail's edge. What on earth are they? I didn't think it meant anything, but it didn't not mean something either. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being funneled, not followed, like someone had been behind me the whole time, but not to chase, just to watch and to see what I'd do. I didn't touch the rocks, didn't look around. I just kept moving. The sun was starting to dip when I reached the car. Nothing looked out of place, but something felt off. Not visual, just a weight in the air. Like whatever had been watching me on the trail had arrived here first. I opened the door and dropped my pack in, got in, turned the key. Nothing. No click, no light, no engine noise, just silence. I tried again. Still nothing. I stepped out, popped the bonnet and had a look. The wires were cut. Not frayed or worn, just clean slices. Done fast, done well. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. I didn't hang around. I pulled my pack out and threw it over my shoulders. I left the car where it sat and headed into the bush. I didn't follow a track. I just moved. Low, quiet, but fast. Put as much terrain as I could between me and the clearing. Every few minutes I stopped, listened, then moved again. No sounds behind me, no voices, just the breeze in the trees and the weight of the pack shifting against my spine. After a while, I dropped down behind a fallen log. I needed to catch my breath. That's when I saw him. He was maybe 60 metres upslope, half behind a tree. Still. Not pacing, not scanning, just watching the clearing, watching where I'd come from. I wouldn't have noticed him at all if the sun hadn't hit the knife in his hand. Just a flash, metal glinting against the light for a second. He didn't raise it. He wasn't doing anything with it. But it was there. He never saw me. After a minute or so, he turned and walked back into the trees. Calm. No rush. I stayed still, waited 5 more minutes, then moved again. I cut across a slope, heading off at an angle. I didn't want to give him a straight line. The ground here was patchy. Bracken, leaf litter, roots. As I stepped over a low branch, I noticed a patch of dirt that looked wrong. Too smooth. Too uniform. Like it had been cleaned and not formed. I crouched and brushed it back gently. There was something underneath. It was shallow, but just deep enough to break an ankle. It was a trap. Literally. Hold. Steel. With teeth. Half rusted and heavy. The kind meant for something bigger than a rabbit. It was a bear trap. There aren't any bears in this part of Australia. He brought it. Placed it. Hid it. He was setting the bush like a snare line. I stepped back, slowly. My heart was ticking loud in my ears. After spending enough time in the bush, you get to understand what belongs and what doesn't. Sights and sounds, and smells. And that's when I smelled it. Something that absolutely didn't belong. Cigarette smoke. Not strong. Not close. But sharp and unmistakable. It certainly didn't belong out here. Not this far in. Not in this kind of bush. And not now. I froze for a second, then looked around. Slowly. Carefully. Nothing in sight. No movement. Just that smell hanging in the air, like a signal only meant for me. That's when I decided to light the fire. The fire lit easier than I expected. I'd wrapped the kindling, but didn't think it'd hold up. The bark took quickly once the gel caught, and within seconds there was a steady coil of smoke pushing up into the trees. It wasn't perfect. One patch jumped sideways into the dry leaf litter and flared hard. I stumped it out before it could spread. The smell caught in my throat, sharp and hot. I didn't stay. I dropped the lighter, grabbed my pack, and moved uphill fast, not caring about trail or footing. I got maybe 60, 70 metres up before I found cover. A half-fallen boulder with a good view down slope and enough brush to break my shape. I dropped into it, pulled the knife from my pack, and waited. The sun was just starting to hit the ridgeline. 15 minutes, maybe 20, before it'd be gone completely. The smoke was rising straight, no wind to scatter it. If someone was close, they'd see it. If no one was close, I was screwed. My hands were shaking again. I held the knife tight and watched the tree line below. Nothing moved. No birds. No crunch of boots. No voice calling my name. Just that horrible stillness, like the bush had paused itself. Then I smelled it. Not the fire. This was sharper. Wrong. Again. Cigarette smoke. Faint. Clean. No fire in it. Just filtered tobacco from too close behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't move. I just listened. It didn't get stronger. It didn't fade. It just lingered. Then it was gone. 10 minutes passed, maybe less. Then I heard tires. Slow, heavy, dragging over rock. Somewhere beyond the clearing, not close enough to panic, but close enough to hope. I stayed hidden until I saw the flash of white between the trees. A full drive. Fire service markings. 2 rangers stepped out, both in high vis, one with a radio on his chest, the other carrying a suppression pack. I didn't wait. I stood and ran. My voice cracked when I called out, but it got louder the second time. They turned just as I stumbled down the slope. I half fell through the bush toward them, yelling as I moved. "Help me! He's got a knife! He's been following me! He's still here, and he's watching me!" One of them caught me before I hit the ground. The other already had binoculars up. He went quiet for a second, and then he said,
"North Ridge, standing still."
I turned with them, up near the ridgeline, half silhouetted in the last stretch of light. There he was, upright, still, just watching the fire. Then he was gone. The ranger radioed it in immediately.
Survivor located. Fire active. Unknown male sighted. North Ridge. Visual lost. May have a weapon. Holding with survivor. Request police response.
They didn't ask me about the fire. One of them started clearing bush around it while the other stayed beside me. They didn't leave. They didn't split up. They didn't say it was fine. They just stayed. It was fully dark by the time the police arrived. 2 more 4-wheel drives. Headlights cutting through trees. Radios clicking. Quiet talk between the rangers and the first officers on scene. But they didn't ask me for much that night. Just basic details. My name, where I'd come from. That all came later at the station. What I saw. I told them about the knife, the bear trap, the fire, the cigarette smoke. I told them there was a hut and gave directions as best I could. They found it easily enough. Inside there was nothing useful. No food, no personal gear. But the wall, that was still there. But all the license sleeves were gone. Dust outlines left behind in rows. Except for one. Mine. No one said much to me about it after. One of the officers called it strange. The ranger I'd spoken to just looked at the photo and didn't comment. They dusted my car for prints the day after. Lifted a partial palm print off the bonnet, just above the headlight, where he would have leaned in to cut the wires. Not much to go on, but it was enough. A match came back 2 days later. The name didn't mean anything to me. Apparently he'd gone missing about 20 years earlier. Lived out somewhere in the bush. No family. Some history with the police. He just stopped showing up one day. No one had ever looked that hard. Now they had a file again. I moved house. Changed my name. I don't hike anymore. When I travel, I book motels with deadlocks on the doors and nothing on the ground floor. Sometimes I smell cigarette smoke. Doesn't matter where I am. It always puts me back in that bush. So I check the windows every time.
Thanks for sticking around till the end. Stay safe until next time, and maybe don't go camping.